This Fleet Equipment Unscripted interview is presented by Hendrickson, a leading manufacturer of heavy-duty suspension systems and components to the global commercial transportation industry. Visit hendrickson-intl.com to learn more.
Hi everyone, I'm Jason Morgan, Content Director for Fleet Equipment, and welcome to Fleet Equipment Unscripted. Today we're talking with Nick Pittinger, Director of Data Services with Decisiv, and Chip Mowry, who's had a 38-year career in the truck dealership and service world. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, so, Decisiv, one of the things I always look forward to every year, especially at the TMC meeting, is you put out the North American Service Benchmark report that has a lot of great info on parts and labor costs and trends. And you have graciously, very nicely, shared some new data with us. We have some new quarterly data here on VMRS service activity that I really kind of want to talk through and get an idea for what you're seeing out there in the truck service world as far as trends. Nick, I'll kick it off here first with you with a question of what trends are you seeing in this new VMRS service level data? Any indicators that are pointing to? Are we seeing older trucks in the service world right now? I know that's been a big topic. What are you seeing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think two of the main areas that we were noticing spikes and trends in were around the frame-related operations as well as the exhaust operations. With regards to the frame, the reason that we found that a little bit interesting was there were spikes both in the quarter-over-quarter comparisons as well as the year-over-year changes for that particular system code. When we had kind of looked through the trends of that over time, a lot of that had been stable through the previous quarters, other than this most recent quarter being Q1 2023. When we dug like the next layer deeper, we found that there was a sharp increase in a handful of operations, many of which were referencing things like basic inspection of terminals, and those were happening out in California, as well as a spike in chassis frame general and bumper related operations. The second one that we found interesting, again, I mentioned, was the 043 exhaust system code. For that one in particular, we saw a decrease year over year of around 3,000 operations. So being able to compare, Q1 2022 versus Q1 2023 data, when kind of, again, digging that next layer deeper, what we saw that explained a good chunk of that, 3,000 operation drop in volume. We found a lot of recall activity back in Q1 2022 here in this particular exhaust system code. And those recalls, again, weren't present in the 2023 data.
Right, very interesting. And again, I'm gonna step back because I know I get excited about it and jump into it too. But so everybody knows, and we're on a level playing field here. Decisiv has integrations across many service providers and many service softwares, right? So these are actual service events coming in at the VMRS level that you're able to pool that data and take a look at it. So when we talk about frame or exhaust that is related to the VMRS code that's going through, not some sort of anecdotal or note related service write-up.
That's correct. Yeah, so Decisiv is partnering with a lot of our OEM partners in their dealer networks, and we get roughly 14,000 service events a day. And each of those service events could have one or many operations on it. And what our process is doing is we're taking a lot of that information about the case and those operations and running it through our Decisiv encoding model to be able to help have a better idea of the types of work that are happening across the industry during a period of time. So again, a lot of this is going back to quarter over quarter, year over year type of trends. But ideally, our encoding model is able to be able to put a VMRS code key 31 system code on roughly 75% of the operations that are flowing through our platform, which in turn will help give better visibility to both the dealers of the types of work that they're kind of servicing in a more standardized nomenclature way, but also for the fleets as well to be able to understand where they, again, spending their money, what are the, more volumes of operations, what are the things they should be expecting, or the things that are happening in the industry that could lead them to, make different business decisions, knowing, having more of this information at their disposal.
Okay, excellent. And within that data, you'd called out a few really interesting points there on frame and exhaust. But is there anything related specifically to older trucks that we're hearing anecdotally in the market? Truck life cycles getting longer. Any standout data points that we've seen in the past quarter?
I think some of the data that we are seeing that relates a little bit more towards the older trucks or the types of work changing as trucks age. One area was around the 002 cab and sheet metal work. So when we were kind of looking at that in the age buckets of like 0 to 3 years for an asset, we see that account for about 15% of the work that's happening. But that continues to decrease as the different age buckets increase. So when I compare that, 0 to 3 age bucket for trucks, accounting for 15% of the work, when I look at the age bucket of 9 or more years, I see that drop down to 7%. So, 50% reduction in the amount of work. And what our thoughts are there is that, owners, as trucks age or as second owners come into ownership, the owners will care less about the bumps and dings on their trucks as they get older, and even like second owners may not have as much money to keep those trucks on the road, and they'd rather invest that towards power plants, the engines, motors, brakes, etc., to keep the truck running and worrying less about the bumps and dings on the truck. And kind of to add on to that, when looking at the age buckets again and comparing it to some of those other things like I just mentioned, like 045 power plant, we see that amount of work increasing from early age of the truck to later ages of the truck. Again, similar time frame of the early age buckets of 0 to 3 years, we see about 19% of the work tied to power plant. Older age buckets, closer to 25% of the work that's coming in. Similar with brakes, 013 brakes as the system code, early age bucket of 6%, older age bucket showing closer to 10% of the work. And those percentages are based on the overall percent of operations happening within that quarter. So it's just showing that shift of certain things become less important, other things become more important as that truck ages.
Okay, a lot of interesting data there, and Decisiv always has great data. But you talk about your service relationship management platform there too. I want to dig into the relationship part of it a little bit, because that's the people working with people. And Chip, you've had a long history in the truck service world. You've seen the average age of trucks ebb and flow here. How does the increasing age of trucks impact those service relationships and how you work customers through those increased service needs?
Well, first of all, it's also a difference in the customer base, right? You have truck owners, and then you have people that happen to own trucks.
Right.
A truck owner understands his business. He understands the cost and the operating costs of that vehicle. The person who happens to own the truck, they say to you, "Why I got to change the oil? It was new when I bought it."
Right.
So that you have to filter out when you're dealing with a customer. But it's also when we're talking about the vehicles getting older, and it's also a regional thing. One of the things that Nick points out is that he saw that there was a spike in that one exhaust in California.
Right.
My experience has always been in the Northeast. So we're exposed to a totally, the repairs are changed. It's even, from location to location, even in the Northeast, from dealerships, things change. But the communication with Decisiv is key to that, because you can be fully transparent to the customer, give them an estimate so they can be prepared on what they're going to get for a repair cost, right? One of the things I preach out in at the service departments is that our customers use their vehicle to pay mortgage and rent. We're not a car dealership. I can get to work. Nick can give me a ride to work if my car's broke. Somebody can't pay mortgage and rent. So the empathy that you need to do. And then the other thing that's a challenge of today's environment is that the technology of the vehicle. You're trying to explain to a guy that he's going to pay you his estimate's $12,000 because his delta pressure sensor's bad. And he says, "I have one of those." So, and it just tumbleweeds into that more higher level of explanation of the repair.
Right. I know the thing that stuck out to me there, I loved your take on empathy there and understanding the importance of the commercial vehicle, but the transparency, right? The customer being able to see what you see, being able to talk about the same components, the same needs, bringing that visibility in on both sides so that you can have a conversation about it, as opposed to, you just having the information and maybe someone feeling like, to your point, I didn't even know I had that. Is this a real thing? The cost, it can be an emotional or kind of a standoffish moment that you want to try to take the wind out of and level set everybody and have everybody talking about the same information.
Let's add into that, though, when you say the word transparency, there's another thing about what Decisiv brings to that communication, to that portal, is that everyone who has access, who's been given a login and has access to that portal, has access to that case. That's customer and dealership, right?
Right.
So even though, let's say you and me are emailing each other, well, you and me are the only ones that see that.
Right.
But if we're communicating through the Decisiv platform and using the case notes, I have them off yesterday. I come in today, what's going on in my unit? I could jump into that case and full transparency. I can now get up to speed on what's going on with that truck.
Right.
The thing is that both parties have to buy into that form of communication. Right. We talk about it Decisiv a lot of times. That case notes and that the history and the different versions of the estimate as the repair escalates and all that stuff being right there and seen works perfect as long as everybody's into it. It breaks when somebody picks up the phone.
Right.
And doesn't document it in the case. We can talk verbally on the phone, but we have to put it in the case so it's documented. It's there, so everyone has access.
Right. For sure. Something else I want to get both your opinions on here are some of the huge year-over-year increases in parts and labor costs we've seen in the latest data. I mean, frame was up, as we noted earlier, 25%. Steering was up 32%, PTO 22%, aero devices up 54%. Nick, we'll start with you. Is that a trend? Are those trends that you've seen continued from last year or even the year before, or anything that stands out to you in those segments?
Yeah, I'd say that for the purpose of this report and the analysis that we've done up to this point, it's really just focused on the past 5 quarters. So looking at data from Q1 2022 through Q1 2023. So that's kind of the trends that we've been looking at and analyzing. Definitely seeing the same things that you were pulling out. That frame, as we talked about earlier, was definitely up year over year. Steering and PTO both had decent volume and percentage changes. Don't have any true feelings on whether or not those things are just random spikes or if that's something that the industry is shifting towards, but something we'll plan to continue to monitor in the future.
Right.
When I did look into steering a little bit, similar to earlier, we started to kind of dig that next layer deeper and being able to see that there were a big increase in recalls and proactive inspections on steering gears specifically.
Okay.
I think steering, if I remember the numbers correctly, they were up about 10,000 operations from Q1 2022 versus Q1 2023, and about 5,000 of those by itself were tied to those steering gear recall and inspection operations happening this year that weren't there last year.
Right.
As it relates to the aerodynamic devices, that one 54% increase. Definitely a big increase. I think probably the bigger explanation there, or at least where I'm kind of leaning towards, is that since it had such a small volume of operations tied to it as a starting point, any decent change will make a meaningful percentage change. So 54% sounds high, but if you're starting with 1,000, 2,000 operations, it doesn't take much for that to be a huge percentage jump. So we'll keep an eye on it, but not something that I was kind of digging into too much.
Okay, interesting and a good perspective there. Chip, I want to go back to something, and maybe it relates because as I look through the data and those things that stand out to me, the steering, the aero, again, those are things that, you put it earlier of maybe new technology or new devices that you didn't even know you had on the truck. How did you keep a handle on that and walk people through that as those things came up? Do you have any advice or anecdotes on how you can best manage those expectations and let people know the importance of those devices and or components and how you work through those conversations?
You got to bring them in. A lot of times we have to ask the person, you got to come in. This isn't a repair that we need to chat on a case, going back and forth the case or on the phone. You need to come in. We got to walk around your truck. Again, you're paying your mortgage, you're paying your livelihood with that. Right. Let's go walk around this vehicle. Back to the steering gear. I mean, you have that huge recall right now that's affecting all OEMs, right? I think it's the majority of the data I saw was Freightliner and International had the most of those steering boxes put in them. So that's going to spike is what he's seeing in his VMRS data. So, right. But that back to your original thing, that's the answer. You got to bring them in. And sometimes you just have to show them, right? Because it's also a matter of showing them, they're looking at this part, let's say a $75 part, and they're saying, well, why is the labor 5 hours to do it?
Right.
Well, this is what all you got to go through to get to it.
Right. No, I like that too. And I mean, even I like the dichotomy too of the steering component and then the aero component, right? One is critically related to safety and something that you have that. And the aero device, is related to that ROI and efficiency and is equally important, but the way people weigh those components might be different. To your point, being able to see how the repair, what would be needed in the repair, where it's at, understanding it. I mean, I really like the idea that it brings together the idea of, okay, the data and visibility can lay a foundation. We can all talk about the same thing and understand where we are, but there's still that personal component of being able to work with people, pay the mortgages, get the equipment back on the road to make it all work efficiently and productively. Gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time. This is great. You know what? We're going to have you back here because there's a lot more data to dig into here. So I'm going to talk to you again soon. We'll have a part 2. But thanks for taking the time today, and I'm sure we'll talk soon here.
Thanks for the opportunity.